The wind off Lake Michigan was biting, a cold that seeped through the thickest wool coats. But inside the grand ballroom of the Peninsula Chicago, the air was heavy with the scent of expensive cologne, aged scotch, and the silent, vibrating hum of immense power. This wasn't a charity gala for art or historical artifacts. It was the Sanctuary Auction, a controversial high society event where wealthy patrons bought the debts and legal custody of individuals in extreme crisis to act as long-term domestic surrogates or laborers under strict private contracts. Mike Samsa, the 38-year-old CFO of Samsa Vance Global, sat in the third row. His suit was a midnight blue Tom Ford, his face a mask of calculated indifference. Mike was a man who lived by spreadsheets and quarterly projections. He didn't believe in fate, he believed in leverage. Recently, however, his life had hit a wall. His father, the patriarch of the Samsa Empire, had issued a cold ultimatum: produce an heir to secure his position as CEO, or the company would pass to his reckless younger cousin. Mike didn't want a wife. He didn't have time for the emotional tax of a relationship, but he needed a child. The auctioneer's gavel struck the podium. Lot 42, the man announced, his voice smooth as silk. Clara Evans, 26 years old, formerly a nursing student at Northwestern. Current status, indigent, no living relatives. This lot includes the assumption of her medical debts and full guardianship rights for a period of 5 years. The doors at the side of the stage opened. A woman walked out, flanked by 2 security guards. She was thin, painfully so, wearing a gray, oversized tracksuit that couldn't hide the trembling in her hands. Her hair was a matted chestnut brown, and her eyes were fixed firmly on the floor. But it was what she held in her arms that caused a murmur to ripple through the crowd of billionaires. She was clutching a bundle of blankets, a baby. The lot includes the dependent, the auctioneer added casually. Mike looked at his program. Clara Evans. He looked at her face. Despite the hollow cheeks and the shadow of exhaustion, there was a fierce, feral protective glow in her eyes as she pulled the baby closer. Mike didn't see a victim. He saw a woman who had survived the impossible. He saw a solution to his problem. 50,000, a voice called out from the back. 100, Mike said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. The room went silent. Mike didn't look back. He kept his eyes on Clara. She finally looked up, her blue eyes meeting his. There was no plea for mercy in them, only a desperate, burning question. 500,000, Mike said, outbidding himself before anyone else could speak. In cash, immediate transfer. The gavel fell. Sold to Mr. Mike Samsa. Mike stood up, buttoning his jacket. He didn't wait for the applause. He walked toward the stage. As he approached Clara, the security guards stepped back. Clara pulled the baby tighter, her knuckles white. "I'm not going to hurt you," Mike said, his voice low and devoid of the warmth people usually expect in these stories. It was a business tone. "But you are coming with me. From this moment on, you and your child are under my protection, and in exchange, you are going to give me what I need." Clara's voice was a raspy whisper, cracked from the cold Chicago nights. "What do you need?" "A future," Mike replied. "Follow me." The penthouse at the top of the Samsa Tower was a masterpiece of glass, steel, and white marble. To Clara, it felt like landing on another planet. After months of sleeping in the basement of a shelter or under the overpass on Wacker Drive, the silence of the apartment was deafening. Mike led her into a sprawling guest suite that was larger than any apartment she had ever lived in. "There is a nursery through that door," he said, gesturing to a room filled with high-end furniture and untouched toys. "I had my assistant prepare it this afternoon. There are clothes for you in the closet. Food will be delivered at 7 p.m. Clara stood in the center of the plush rug, her boots leaving faint, damp stains on the fabric. She looked at the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Chicago looked beautiful from this high up, but she knew the darkness that lived in its alleys. "Why me?" she asked, her voice finally finding some strength. There were women there without children, women who were healthier. Mike turned at the door. He looked at her with a clinical gaze. "Because you didn't cry. Everyone else on that stage was performing their misery. You were just trying to keep that child warm. I value resilience over performance, Clara. And I need a mother for my child who knows how to survive. I'm not giving you my daughter, Clara said, her voice shaking. I don't want your daughter, Mike corrected. I need an heir, a biological Samsa. The contract you signed, or rather the contract I bought, specifies that you will act as a surrogate. In exchange, your medical debts are wiped. Your daughter, Lily, will receive the best education, health care, and a trust fund that ensures she never sees a sidewalk again. When the child is born, you are free to go with $1 million in your account. Or you can stay as a compensated guardian. Clara looked down at Lily, who was finally sleeping. The baby's cheeks were red from windburn. Clara's heart ached. She was a mother, but she was also a woman who had been discarded by society after her parents died in a car accident, leaving her with a mountain of debt and no safety net. You're buying a person, Mr. Samsa, she said. I'm buying a solution, he replied. Sleep, Clara. Tomorrow my lawyer will be here to finalize the medical appointments. You need to get healthy first. As Mike left the room, he felt a strange tightening in his chest. He told himself it was just the stress of the day. But the image of Clara standing in the middle of his cold, perfect apartment, holding that baby like she was holding the only thing that mattered in the world, wouldn't leave his mind. He had all the money in the world, and he had nothing that he loved that much. The first week was a blur of doctors and nutritious meals. Mike's personal physician, Dr. Eris, visited daily. Clara was diagnosed with severe malnutrition and chronic exhaustion. But Lily was miraculously healthy. Mike, true to his word, stayed out of her way, though he watched her through the security cameras more than he cared to admit. He watched her eat, hesitantly at first, as if expecting the food to be taken away. He watched her sing to Lily in a voice that was becoming clearer and more melodic as her throat healed. One evening, Mike came home late to find Clara in the kitchen. She was wearing a simple silk robe he had provided, her hair washed and shining. She was staring at a photograph she had found in a drawer, a picture of Mike as a young boy with his mother. She was beautiful, Clara said softly, not looking up. She died when I was 12, Mike said, walking to the fridge to pour a drink. My father didn't believe in mourning. He believed in moving forward. The next day, I was back in boarding school. Clara turned to him. Is that why this place is so cold? It's not just the marble, Mike. It's you. You've built a fortress. Mike paused, the glass halfway to his lips. The world is a cold place, Clara. You should know that better than anyone. I know that people can be cold, she countered. But I also know that a stranger once gave me his last pair of gloves on a night it was 10 below zero. There is goodness, even in the dirt. You're up here in the clouds, and you've forgotten what it's like to feel anything. Mike walked toward her, his presence intimidating. He stopped just inches away. I feel plenty. I feel the weight of 10,000 employees' livelihoods on my shoulders. I feel the pressure of a legacy that I have to protect. I don't have the luxury of feeling like you do. Then why do you want a child? Clara asked. If it's just for a legacy, why not just adopt? Why go through this? Because a Samsa must be a Samsa, he snapped. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw the scars on her neck. Faint, but there. He reached out, his thumb brushing the skin near her collarbone. Clara flinched, but she didn't pull away. Who did that to you? He asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. Clara looked away. The streets aren't kind to women alone, especially women with something to lose. Mike felt a surge of uncharacteristic rage. He didn't know who had hurt her, but he felt an overwhelming urge to ensure it never happened again. This wasn't part of the deal. She was a lot, a transaction. But as he stood in the quiet kitchen with her, the smell of her shampoo, lavender and vanilla, filling his senses, the transaction was starting to feel very personal. The following Monday, Mike was back in his element. The boardroom of Samsa Vance was a theater of war. His cousin Marcus was already there, leaning back in a leather chair with a smug grin. I heard about your purchase, Mike, Marcus said, loud enough for the other board members to hear. Buying a homeless girl at the sanctuary auction? Bit desperate, even for you. What's the plan? A My Fair Lady project? Or are you just looking for a cheap way to satisfy the old man's requirements? Mike didn't blink. He opened his laptop. Clara Evans is the ward of this estate. Her background is irrelevant to her role. What is relevant, Marcus, is the 12% dip in the European markets that happened under your watch last week. Shall we discuss that, or would you like to continue gossiping like a high schooler? The board members chuckled, and Marcus flushed red. But Mike's mind wasn't entirely on the numbers. He kept thinking about the morning. He had seen Clara in the hallway before he left. She had been playing with Lily, laughing. A real, genuine laugh that seemed to brighten the entire floor. He found himself checking his phone during the meeting, looking at the live feed from the penthouse. Clara was in the library. She was reading a book on architecture. She wasn't just a homeless mom. She was intelligent. She was curious. After the meeting, his father, Arthur Samsa, called him into his office. The room was dark, smelling of tobacco and old money. "I don't care where she came from," Arthur said, his voice gravelly. "But make sure the contracts are ironclad. We don't need a scandal. When the child is born, she disappears. Understood?" "Understood," Mike said. But for the first time in his life, the word felt like a lie. When Mike returned home that night, the penthouse felt different. It felt like a home. There was music playing. Something soft. Jazz. Clara was sitting at the dining table, sketching in a notebook. "I used to want to be an architect," she said as he entered, "before everything fell apart." Mike walked over and looked at the sketch. It was a playground, but not a standard one. It was designed for children with disabilities, integrated into a park setting. It was brilliant. "You have talent," Mike said. "Talent doesn't pay the rent when you're buried in hospital bills from your mother's cancer," Clara replied. "But thank you." Mike sat down across from her. "Clara, my father wants to meet you. There's a dinner on Friday. It's a formality, but a necessary one." Clara looked terrified. "I don't have anything to wear. I don't know how to talk to people like him." "You talk to me," Mike said. "And you're doing fine. I'll have a stylist come by. Just be yourself. That's the only thing that will annoy him, and frankly, I'd enjoy that." For the first time, they shared a smile. A small, tentative thing, but it was a bridge. Friday arrived with a tension that gripped the penthouse. The stylist had transformed Clara. She wore a floor-length emerald green gown that complemented her eyes. Her hair was swept up, revealing the elegant lines of her neck. She looked every bit the high society woman, but her eyes still held that depth of experience that the other women Mike knew lacked. "You look incredible," Mike said, momentarily lost for words as she stepped into the living room. "I feel like an imposter," Clara whispered. "In this world, everyone is an imposter," Mike replied, offering his arm. "Some are just better at it than others." The dinner was held at the Samsa estate in Lake Forest. Arthur Samsa sat at the head of the table like a king. Marcus was there too, looking for any opportunity to trip them up. "So, Clara," Marcus sneered, swirling his wine, "tell us about your upbringing. I hear you've spent a lot of time outdoors lately." The table went quiet. Mike's hand tightened on his fork. He was ready to intervene, but Clara beat him to it. "I have," Clara said, her voice steady. "I've seen parts of this city that I'm sure you only see through the tinted windows of your limousine, Marcus. I've seen the way people help each other when they have nothing, and I've seen the way people like you ignore them. It's an education you can't buy at Harvard." Arthur Samsa let out a short, dry bark of a laugh. "She has spirit, Mike. I'll give her that." The rest of the dinner was a tactical minefield, but Clara navigated it with grace. However, as they were leaving, Marcus cornered Clara near the coat closet. "Don't think you're special," Marcus hissed. "You're a rental, a vessel. Once Mike has what he wants, he'll toss you back to the gutter where he found you. He doesn't love you. He doesn't even know how to love." Clara didn't respond. She walked to the car in silence. On the drive back to the city, Mike noticed her withdrawn state. "Whatever Marcus said, ignore him," Mike said. "He told me I'm a rental," Clara said, looking out the window. "And the thing is, Mike, he's right. That's what the contract says." Mike pulled the car over to the side of the road, overlooking the city skyline. The contract was written by a CFO. It doesn't account for the person who wrote it. He turned to her. Clara, I bought your debt to solve a problem. But having you in my home, seeing how you care for Lily, it's making me realize that the problem wasn't my inheritance. The problem was me. He reached out, cupping her cheek. This time, she didn't flinch. She leaned into his touch. The kiss was slow, desperate, and filled with a longing that neither of them wanted to admit. It was the first time Mike had felt something more powerful than a profit margin. The weeks that followed were a dream. The contractual nature of their relationship began to dissolve into something real. Mike spent his mornings playing with Lily before work, learning how to change a diaper, how to make a baby laugh. He was changing. The cold, calculated CFO was being replaced by a man who looked forward to coming home. He even began using his resources to help Clara. He found the nursing school she had dropped out of and arranged for her to re-enroll in online courses. He bought her a high-end drafting table for her architectural sketches. But shadows were looming. Marcus, fueled by jealousy and the fear of losing his inheritance, began digging into Clara's past. He wasn't looking for her debts. He already knew about those. He was looking for a scandal. One afternoon, while Mike was at a high-stakes meeting, a man appeared at the penthouse door. He was rough-looking, with a jagged scar across his eyebrow and a sneer that made Clara's blood run cold. "Hello, Clara," the man said. "Long time no see." "Elias," Clara whispered, stepping back and trying to close the door. Elias shoved his way in. He was Clara's ex-boyfriend, a small-time criminal who had dragged her down into the spiral of poverty before disappearing when she got pregnant. "I saw your face in the social pages, the CFO's new flame. You've done well for yourself. And I see you've still got my kid." "She's not yours," Clara said, her voice trembling. "You left us. You let us starve." "Doesn't matter," Elias said, looking around the luxurious apartment. "The law's a funny thing. And I bet your rich boyfriend wouldn't want the world to know that his princess has a domestic violence record and a drug-dealing ex. Unless, of course, you pay for my silence." "I don't have any money," Clara said. "But he does." Elias gestured to the room. "Tell him you need 50,000 for, I don't know, charity. Or I go to the press. I go to his father. I'll make sure this little fairy tale ends in a nightmare." Clara was paralyzed. She knew Mike's father would use this to destroy her and take Lily away. She knew Mike's reputation was everything. "Get out," she said, her voice cracking. "I'll be back tomorrow, Clara. Have the money, or I start talking." When Mike came home that night, he found Clara sitting in the dark, Lily clutched to her chest. She wouldn't look at him. She was distant, cold. The walls she had started to tear down were back up, higher and thicker than ever. The atmosphere inside the Samsa penthouse had turned radioactive. For days, the air was thick with things unsaid. Mike, usually a man of surgical precision, found himself staring at the back of Clara's head as she stood by the window, her silhouette framed by the darkening Chicago skyline. He wanted to reach out, to brush his hand against her shoulder, and ask her why she was retreating into a shell he thought they had cracked open together. But every time he moved, she flinched. She wasn't just afraid, she was haunted. Clara felt the ghost of Elias everywhere. The way he had smirked at her in the penthouse entrance, that predatory look that brought back every bruise, every night spent crying in a cold room, was a poison in her veins. She was convinced that if Mike knew the father of her child was a common criminal, a man who had traded her dignity for a fix, the fairy tale would vanish. She saw herself through his eyes, not as a partner, but as a mistake he had paid $500,000 for. The next morning, driven by a panicked survival instinct, Clara made her move. She waited until Mike left for a high-stakes board meeting. Her hands shook as she opened the velvet box on her dresser. Inside sat the Tiffany diamond necklace Mike had given her for their first official anniversary, a piece of jewelry worth more than her parents' entire estate. To Mike, it was a token of affection. To Clara, it was a life raft. She wrapped Lily in a thick bunting and slipped out the service entrance. She took a cab to the south side, away from the polished glass of the Loop, to a pawnshop she remembered from her darker days. The shop was a dim, cramped box that smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. The man behind the plexiglass didn't look at her face, only at the diamonds. He offered her 20 cents on the dollar. It was a robbery, but she didn't care. She needed the cash to pay Elias to vanish. "Just take it," she whispered, her voice cracking. As she stepped out onto the cracked sidewalk, the wind whipped her hair across her face. She didn't notice the black SUV parked half a block away. Inside, Marcus Vance's private investigators were clicking their shutters, capturing every frame of her suspicious transaction. By the time she returned to the penthouse, the sun had set, leaving the city in a bruised purple twilight. She expected silence. Instead, she found the lights blazing. Mike was standing in the center of the living room, his coat still on, his face a mask of cold, terrifying fury. On the marble coffee table lay a manila folder, spilled open. Clara's heart dropped into her stomach. The photos were clear. Her at the pawnshop, her meeting Elias in a secluded corner of Millennium Park the day before, her clutching a thick envelope of cash. "Mike, I can explain," she gasped, her voice barely a breath. "Explain what, Clara?" Mike's voice was a low, dangerous growl. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. The disappointment in his eyes was more painful than any shout. "That while I was at work trying to figure out how to integrate you into my life permanently, you were out selling my gifts to fund a secret life with a convict? That you've been lying to my face for a week?" "He was going to ruin everything," Clara cried, the tears finally breaking through. "That man, Elias, he's Lily's biological father. He found me. He threatened to go to the press, to your father. He wanted to tell them you were living with trash. I was trying to protect you, Mike. I was trying to protect this life we have." Mike took a step toward her, his eyes blazing with a deep, searing hurt. "You thought so little of me? You thought my love was so fragile that a ghost from your past could break it? I thought we were a team. I thought you finally trusted me." "Trust you?" Clara's voice rose into a sob of pure agony. "How could I? Look at how we started. You bought me, Mike. You bought my debt. You bought my time. You bought my loyalty. Every time I look at this beautiful apartment, I don't see a home. I see a cage with gold bars. I was terrified that if I brought my trash into your perfect world, you'd realize I wasn't worth the $500,000 you paid. I'm a transaction to you, and transactions can be canceled." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Mike looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time, the CFO saw the human cost of his arrogance. He had saved her life, yes, but he had done it in a way that stripped her of her soul. He had made her a dependent, not a partner. But the sting of the lie was too fresh. His own trauma, a life of being used for his money, blinded him to her intent. "Get out," Mike said, his voice flat and dead. "Mike, please, let me tell you." "I said get out," he snapped, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. "Take the money from the necklace. Take your things. I need you gone before I say something I can't take back." Clara didn't argue. With shaking hands, she packed a single bag. She took Lily, who was crying now, sensing the tension. As the elevator doors slid shut, separating her from the man she loved, the Chicago winter rushed in to meet her. But the cold outside was nothing compared to the absolute frost in her heart. The motel was called the Blue Spruce, located on a desolate stretch of Cicero Avenue, where the neon signs flickered like dying stars. It smelled of industrial bleach and old regret. Clara sat on the edge of the sagging bed, watching Lily sleep. She had enough money from the pawned necklace to stay here for a month, maybe 2. But the walls felt like they were closing in. She had lost the only man who had ever truly seen her, and she had lost him because she was too afraid of her own shadow. In the city center, Mike Samsa was a man possessed. He didn't go to bed. He stayed in his office at Samsa Vance, the lights of the city below him blurred by his own exhaustion. He worked 20-hour shifts, barking orders at subordinates, his ruthlessness reaching legendary levels. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Clara's face when she said, "You bought me." He returned to the penthouse only once. The silence was agonizing. He walked into the guest suite and found a small striped sock belonging to Lily tucked under the corner of the sofa. He picked it up, the soft fabric a brutal contrast to his hard surroundings. He sank onto the floor, the powerful CFO finally breaking under the weight of his own solitude. He had all the money in the world, and he was completely, utterly alone. 3 days later, the door to his office swung open without a knock. Marcus Vance strolled in, looking like a man who had just won the lottery. He dropped a newspaper on Mike's desk. "Well, Mike, I see the trash took itself out," Marcus sneered, leaning against the mahogany desk. "The board was getting worried about your domestic experiment. Now that she's gone, we can focus on the merger without any distractions. No more homeless moms to ruin the Samsa brand." Mike looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw stubbled. He looked dangerous. "How did you know she left, Marcus? I haven't told anyone." Marcus laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Please. I've had eyes on that girl since the auction. It was too easy, Mike. People like her always revert to their true nature. I just gave her ex a little tip-off, a few bucks to show up and rattle her cage. She folded exactly like I knew she would. She was just a grifter looking for a payday." The world seemed to go still for Mike. The fog of anger and hurt lifted, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. He stood up slowly. His rage wasn't loud. It was the quiet, vibrating hum of a high-voltage wire. "You sent him," Mike whispered. "You found a man who abused her, a man she was terrified of, and you brought him into my home to harass her. You did that to a woman who had nothing. To a baby." Marcus's smile faltered. "I did what was necessary for the company, Mike. You were compromised." "Clara Evans is the most honest person I have ever met," Mike said, his voice trembling with a terrifying restraint. "She didn't sell that necklace for herself. She sold it to protect me from the mess you created. She tried to sacrifice her own dignity to keep your poison away from my life. And you're my own blood, and you tried to destroy my happiness for a seat at a table." Mike picked up his desk phone. "Security, come to my office immediately. Escort Mr. Vance out of the building. He is no longer an employee of Samsa Vance. His access is revoked, and his shares are to be frozen pending an internal audit into his use of company funds for private investigators." "You can't do this!" Marcus yelled, as 2 large security guards entered and grabbed his arms. "The board won't allow it. Our father won't allow it. You're throwing away the legacy for a gutter rat." "The board will do exactly what I tell them," Mike said, leaning over his desk, "because I am the only reason this company is still profitable. And as for my father, he can find another heir. I'm done being a Samsa, if it means being like you." Once Marcus was dragged out, Mike turned to his head of security, a former Mossad agent named Elias, no relation to the ex. "I don't care what it costs. I don't care how many laws you have to bend. Find her. Check every motel, every shelter, every credit card ping. Find Clara, and do it now." It took 36 hours of agonizing searching. The lead came from a ping on Clara's phone when she briefly turned it on to check a nursing school notification. Mike arrived at the Blue Spruce just as a massive Chicago thunderstorm was rolling in. Lightning fractured the sky, illuminating the puddles of oil and rain on the cracked pavement. He didn't care about his $1,000 shoes or his tailored suit. He ran to the second floor, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He reached room 214 and knocked. No answer. He knocked harder, the sound muffled by the roar of the rain. "Clara, it's Mike. Please, open the door." The lock turned slowly. When the door opened, Mike felt a physical pain in his chest. Clara looked hollow. Her hair was tangled, her eyes rimmed with red, and she was wearing the same sweatshirt she had worn the night she left. "Mike?" she whispered, leaning against the door frame as if she might collapse. "I'm an idiot," Mike said, pushing past her into the small, cramped room. He didn't wait for an invitation. The room was cold, the heater humming a useless tune. "I spent my whole life thinking everything could be bought, Clara. I thought I bought your safety with a contract. I thought I bought your loyalty with a necklace. But I forgot the most important thing. I hadn't earned your trust." Clara shook her head, tears starting to fall. "You didn't do anything wrong. I lied to you. I was so ashamed of where I came from. I thought if you saw it, you'd hate me." "I could never hate you," Mike said, stepping close and taking her cold hands in his. "I know everything. I know what Marcus did. I know about Elias. I've spent the last 48 hours dismantling their lives. Elias is in custody for a dozen outstanding warrants, and Marcus will never set foot in a boardroom again. They will never touch you or Lily again. I promise. He looked around the room, the cheap furniture, the smell of dust, and then back at her. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I realize that the penthouse isn't a home without you. It's just a museum of expensive things. Suddenly, Mike did something no one in the business world would ever expect of him. He knelt down. Not on a red carpet, but on the stained, threadbare carpet of a $20 a night motel. "Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't want a surrogate. I don't want a lot from an auction. I don't want to be your guardian or your owner. I want to be your partner. I want to be the father Lily deserves and the man you deserve. I want to earn your trust every single day for the rest of my life. But your father, the Samsa name, let it burn," Mike said, a fierce smile breaking through his exhaustion. "I have enough of my own wealth to start 100 companies. But I only have one heart, and it's currently in this room, begging for a second chance." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was not the diamond necklace, but a simple, elegant band of gold, engraved with the date they met. "This isn't a contract, Clara. It's a promise. No more auctions. No more secrets. Just us. As equals. Will you come home?" Clara looked at Lily, who had woken up, and was watching them with wide, curious eyes. She looked at Mike, not the CFO, but the man who had traveled through a storm to find her in a dive motel. "Yes," she whispered, pulling him up and burying her face in his neck. "Yes, Mike. Let's go home." 1 year later. The morning sun over the West Loop didn't just shine. It glistened off the restored red brick and industrial glass of the newly inaugurated Evans Samsa Center. A year ago, this neighborhood was a collection of forgotten warehouses. Today, it was the heartbeat of a social revolution. Blue and white silk ribbons danced in the breeze coming off the Chicago River, and the air carried the scent of fresh espresso and the faint, sweet aroma of the blooming jasmine Clara had insisted on planting in the courtyard. The guest list was a testament to the seismic shift in Mike Samsa's life. In the front rows sat the old guard, billionaires in charcoal suits who had once only seen Clara as a lot number at an auction. But behind them, filling the rest of the seats, were the people who actually mattered. The first 30 families moving into the sanctuary complex. These were women who had slept in cars, veterans who had been forgotten by the system, and children who finally had a permanent address. Clara stood behind the mahogany podium, her fingers lightly brushing the polished wood. She wore a cream-colored Armani suit, a gift from Mike, but she wore it differently than the socialites did. She didn't wear it as a costume, she wore it as armor. Her chestnut hair was styled in an elegant, loose wave, and her blue eyes, once hollowed by the fear of the streets, now burned with the fire of a woman who had found her voice. "For a long time," Clara began, her voice steady and clear, echoing through the state-of-the-art speakers, "I believed that the world was divided into 2 types of people. Those who buy and those who are bought. I lived in the shadows of the skyscrapers we are standing beneath today. I knew the cold of the Chicago winter not as a season, but as a predator." The crowd went silent. Even the jaded journalists at the back lowered their cameras. "A home is more than just a roof and 4 walls," Clara continued, catching Mike's eye in the front row. "It is a foundation of dignity. It is the soil where hope is allowed to take root. Today, we aren't just opening a building. We are opening a promise. The sanctuary complex is a holistic environment. Here, a mother doesn't just get a bed. She gets a legal team to fight for her rights, a medical clinic for her children, and the architectural beauty she deserves. No one should have to be bought to be saved. Today, we choose to invest in the human spirit." As the crowd erupted into a standing ovation, Mike felt a lump in his throat. He couldn't swallow. He was holding Lily, who was now a vibrant toddler, with a mischievous spark in her eyes. She was wearing a tiny cream dress that matched her mother's, kicking her legs in excitement as she recognized Clara's voice. Mike had walked away from Samsa Vance 6 months ago. The transition hadn't been easy. His father had tried to sue him, and the board had tried to smear him, but Mike had simply smiled and handed over his keys. He didn't need the SAMSA name anymore. He had started the SAMSA Impact Fund, and within 90 days, he had redirected more capital into social housing than his father's company had seen in a decade. He realized that the high of a successful merger was nothing compared to the look on a father's face when he was handed the keys to a safe apartment. After the ribbon was cut, the family retreated from the cameras, walking toward the park that served as the center's backyard. This wasn't a standard city park. It was the physical manifestation of Clara's midnight sketches. There were sensory paths with different textures for children with autism, low-impact ramps for the elderly, and a community garden where the residents were already planting tomatoes and kale. Mike caught up to Clara near the fountain. He tucked Lily under one arm and used the other to pull Clara into his side. "You did it, Clara," he whispered, his voice thick with pride. "You didn't just pass your boards. You changed the DNA of this city. Look at them." He pointed to a group of children from the complex playing on the swings with children from the nearby luxury condos. There were no barriers. No lots. Just children. "We did it," Clara corrected him, turning in his arms to look him in the eye. "I had the vision, Mike, but you gave me the ground to stand on. You gave me the space to be more than just a survivor. You gave me the chance to be a creator." Mike leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "I think I'm the one who got the better deal. My father still thinks I'm crazy for throwing it all away. He called me yesterday, still obsessed with the bottom line. He asked me what I gained from all this." "And what did you say?" Clara asked with a small smile. Mike looked at Lily, who was currently trying to help a lady plant a flower, and then back at the woman who had saved him from a life of cold, calculated loneliness. "I told him that I used to be a CFO who knew the price of everything and the value of nothing," Mike said. "And now? I told him I'm finally the richest man in the world, and for the first time in my life, I'm not for sale." As the golden hour descended upon Chicago, the city looked like it was made of liquid copper. The glass towers of the Loop reflected the light, but the warmest glow came from the red bricks of the Evans SAMSA Center. The CFO and the homeless mom were labels that belonged to a past life. Here, in the warmth of the setting sun, they were simply Mike and Clara, two people who had found that the most beautiful structures aren't made of steel and stone, but of trust, resilience, and a love that refuses to give up. The modern fairy tale wasn't about a prince rescuing a damsel. It was about two broken people building a bridge out of the wreckage of their pasts and realizing that, in the end, the only thing worth buying into is each other.